Hello, everyone, and welcome to Professional Relationship Manager podcast. I'm the host, Kurt Phelps, and I have a wonderful, wonderful guest, Jeff Heine. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Kurt. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining. Jeff is the CRO of Accent Technologies. And I think, Jeff, you just started there in June, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Everybody, I'm on Jeff's personal website now, and I love his picture. I'm assuming this is your son, right, Jeff, of him playing baseball?
Yes, it is. He's playing travel baseball. It's which for Jonah was a pretty big achievement. So we're pretty excited to share that.
And how old is your son?
He is 12.
12. And is baseball his favorite sport?
It is his favorite sport. Yeah, he's been playing it since he could pretty much crawl.
Yeah, I was fortunate, brought up in a baseball family. My father was a huge baseball guy and signed with the Yankees back many, many, many years ago. So we've been kind of born and bred with the Yankees all my life. But my son I've been fortunate to coach him. I was pretty sad this past year because it was the first year that I wasn't able to be a coach anymore. My son's too old now. So it was like a big letdown in my life of not being able to coach either baseball or basketball. So obviously, I'm not sure if you've had a chance yet to coach your son, but it's a little letdown when you get older that you can't coach him anymore. Have you had a chance to coach yet?
I was supporting coach. So I did all the book, the stats, coordinating. So I couldn't be at every game because of my travel schedule. But I'm a sports and specifically a baseball junkie and a numbers junkie. So it was my way to contribute. So I was the person basically calling the pitch count for 12-year-olds. A little funny at this age, but anybody that has a kid in travel sports realizes that's kind of the sign of the times.
So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be an executive and a hiring manager in the market and what you've seen change when it comes to hiring. And then we'll talk a little bit about your career and some of the choices that you made to get where you're at. I'm curious right off the bat. And when I look at your background and your education, you got a pre-law in criminal justice, but then you've transitioned into this technology world. How did that all happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I was pretty much groomed to be a lawyer and still probably would actually know that I would like at some point, just more from an educational perspective, to get a JD. I was encouraged to go out and explore the world before taking any more education, probably largely because of who I am as a person. I'm a bit more creative, although I appear very kind of down the line. I'm a little bit unstructured and creative, and was given some advice to go try basically business. And I ended up getting, by a friend of a friend, connected with the Tolman brothers, who are prominent entrepreneurs in Chicago, and kind of fell in love with the startup world. And so that's what I've been doing, is startup tech ever since. And it fits me because I'm fairly fast paced and it changes a lot, which keeps my brain happy. So, and I've never looked back. Oddly enough, I've been in and around the law field in terms of the technology that serves the industry, whether it be in-house corporate law or, basically external. But yeah.
So that brings up a great, obviously I've been, in my world, been fortunate to do a lot of startups. How many startups have you been a part of?
9.
Wow. And how many, if you look back on them, how many were true success stories?
So I'm on my 9th, so I would have to say out of the 8 that count in that discussion, 7. And not everyone was, the A exit. Some were in the venture world called Bs, but we did get to exit. But I've had a couple really good successes as well. What
was your biggest success story, do you think, if you look back on those 8? You had to narrow it down to a couple.
I would have to say, the obvious is Guidewire being the first in its sales there with a market cap of $5 billion plus that serves the insurance community. That was an incredible group of people. But oddly enough, I would have to say one of my most recent, which was at Sensa. It was taking a UK-based startup to not only North America but global, and we did that pretty successfully without any outside capital to get to exit. So, generally you have the room to maneuver with capital. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier. But literally, as you're growing and you're completely bootstrapping each time and kind of living off of what you kill, so to speak, that was pretty rewarding. Plus, taking a company from Europe to, I said the UK, to other parts of the world, that was a bit of a different challenge for me. So that was quite rewarding.
I think, the two questions pop in my head, and I'm sure everybody is going to want to hear this a little bit from your end. One is, you have a lot of people that go from startups and don't have two successful ones, let alone seven. How do you pick your startups? How do you know, and how have you had such a great track record of picking that early stage startup and knowing it's the right one to be a part of? Because there's so many failures.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple elements that have proved to be successful for me, and I have to say, like, I'm a contributing member to all of those. Anybody that ever has participated in a startup is not one person; it's a group of people working together. So I just want to say that.
Yeah.
The first thing I do is I look at market, and does the market have a need, even before I get to the company and the products, because the products and the companies can adjust. But if there's not a market need, then from a go-to-market standpoint, that's going to be very, very tough. So I look at the market and the opportunity, and not so much the timing, although that's a factor. But I always base it on the marketing and what the buyers will react to and what truly helps them be successful. And kind of the rules of three. If you can't hit one of their three top issues with your offering, it's going to be tough sledding for a long, long time. And so it's really about the difference of being have to have versus nice to have. And frankly, I generally bet on the founders. And I would say that probably be inclusive in the board that supports them. Do I feel like they're going to have the ability to execute? Because at the top level, that's really what it's about. It's going to come from the leadership perspective. And I've been very fortunate. My one failure had great leadership too, but it's not always the end all be all either. But yeah, those are a couple of the elements I look at quite hard.
How do you determine between nice to have and must have?
So yeah, and I think that's the difference I've always approached it with and I've had some great coaching, some of the best board members and mentors and CEOs that I can think of, and they've taught me to think with a market centricity, and that's even kind of beyond the buyer. It's from a market dynamics perspective, does the problem that you solve hit what they think about day to day? And if it doesn't mean you can't create a case. But the reality is, if it's not a top of mind business problem for them, it's going to be very, very difficult. And one buyer doesn't constitute a market. It's going to be a homogenous set of buyers that's going to support the ability for you to actually grow at the rate typically investors want. So a really good analysis from there, because really, that's what you build your go-to-market off of, is those market realities. And that's where maybe mistake is too strong of a word, but oftentimes it's to look at the company and the product and even just some of the buyers. If you could look at it at a macro level and figure if there's the canvas to paint on, if you will, it's big enough, then you have something.
What, again, with this progression that you've had from startups, how have you typically found these opportunities?
Frankly, I've been fortunate. I've mostly been found past the first stint with CCC. There's been one time where I sought out, a change. Generally it's been networking, right? You generally go towards either recruiters or former execs or former board members that almost play matchmaker to say, okay, great. I think you could work very well in this market with this company, with this exec. So that's generally how it's come to be.
So have you found more of your opportunities, because again, startups are difficult, right? They don't have a brand yet, from people that you trust and know already, or a lot of them, were you taking risks from people you didn't know?
Well, some of them at risks I didn't know, but I would know somebody that knows them, if that makes some sense. So I could do my own vetting, because without any disrespect, every founder and entrepreneur thinks they're going to be successful. It's one of the reasons why they do what they do. And some of them are, and you just don't feel like that's the right opportunity for you. So you kind of have to find the right pairing. But generally I've been able to validate, the type of person I would work with. Because I would consider myself as colleagues, not just, who I report to, but also I go back to market, have they assessed their market, the right way? And if not, sometimes it's opportunity for a person like me where, it's interesting. I had a chance to do a little bit of mentoring with some of the smaller tech companies in Chicago around the holidays, and even companies that have, 7 million, 10 million in terms of recurring revenue are still going, I'm not sure I get my market. I'm not sure I get repeatability. And so that's why I think the skill set of being able to actually look at that market and help these founders grow is really been very attractive for me. But that's been my validating point. If I can't believe in the market, I can't bond with the opportunity.
I mean, how do you, because obviously I've seen this, and I was just having a conversation with an executive in another podcast that I was working with. I've known John Lombardi for many years. He went to a very well-known company going through tremendous growth. There's a huge market play for them, but he got in there and the CEO was someone that he just could never work for, but he didn't know that because he didn't know anybody in the company. So how do you, because it's one of the biggest struggles you have as an executive. It's not just the product. It's not just the service. It's, you guys are all leaders now, right? You're all A-type. How do you vet out making sure that you'll work well with the other executive team? How have you been able to do that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of elements too. So one of which is just spending time with them, not just in a formal interview environment. That's important. Outside, having a drink, a meal, like really starting to get to know what makes them tick and also what makes me tick. For example, I have 3 kids. That's important to me. I work a lot. I travel a lot. I don't suffer from sacrificing for work, but at the same time, somebody that's going to get working with me, sometimes my kids will be important. I need to test some of that and make sure that they're okay with that. The other part is kind of creating scenarios around, topics of, let's say, go to market. Let me present what my thinking is, and which is interesting too, because oftentimes early on that might conflict with what a founder believes. So if you can come to some sort of commonality in terms of the way you think about it, even if you disagree on points, that's almost like a dress rehearsal of can you have some of the substantive conversations and actually come to some sort of agreement and common ground. So I generally don't, including my most recent venture, we spent a lot of time. And my one little nit is companies still interview and then say, oh, I want this candidate. Are you ready? And then oftentimes for me, I'm like, no, I don't know that I know enough. So I kind of have to go through my own cycle. And I think you just have to have the discipline to do that. And that's no disrespect, but both parties have to buy in. It's a lot like a sales cycle, right? That you go through, and I've spent 20 plus years orchestrating. So a lot of it's maintaining discipline there and not just kind of going on hunches. And ultimately, if I can't get to know the founders or know somebody that can help me understand that, I probably would back away.
I get it, because that tells you a lot about the executive in itself. If they're not willing to open themselves up, then what's wrong? With you finally get in there, what issues are you going to find? Because he's not willing to open up, because he should care about as much as you do.
Yeah, specifically my role has become really the leader of the go-to-market strategy, which is marketing, sales, and then the execution of that with implementation. And if we can't have healthy debate, then I look at that and say, and emphasize healthy debate. It's not arguing, it's healthy debate. Then we're probably not going to be successful, because early stage, even if you are getting product market fit, you do need to pivot a bit. And if it's just the CEO gets the call, then that's probably not going to work, because you somewhat hamstring the people that you want to work with.
Right. It's funny. One of the things I always tell when I get to an offer stage with a candidate, I always tell them, this is your first time where you're going to prove that both parties can work together. Most candidates don't think that way, but can you work together and come to terms? And you can't be the most important thing here. That you have to be smart enough to know the company's important too. And the company needs to realize they're not just important, that the candidate's important too. This is your first time. Can you collaborate and work together to find out what works best for you and the company? And I try to stress that very heavily when I prep for that process, because it's the first time that you're determining how well you can work together. Can you come to terms together? Or are you just, or do you only care about your side and that's it? Well, that's going to be a problem. Or is the company only going to care about their side and that's it? So it's funny how I try to stress that very heavily. It's not just an offer with a bunch of numbers. This is actually your first test. Can you work together to come to terms that make sense for both of you?
Yeah, and I'm going to be somewhat obtuse here intentionally, but one of the most recent ventures, the offer, and I'm not talking about financials, but the shape of it and what the focus would be wasn't ultimately what I wanted. And I had other opportunities, but I really wanted to work with this entrepreneur and this company. So I proposed, with the help of some coaching by some very good mentors, what I thought to be the position that leveraged the strengths that I bring and also the needs of the company and kind of stretched the horizon of time. And we ended up having that was probably the best dress rehearsal, because we both like, yeah, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I'm meeting the company where it is now and doing what's required in terms of the quote unquote blocking and tackling. But my overall view is to build the entire go-to-market, and it's worked thus far. So,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about taking a little bit of that courage up front and making sure you get what you need out of it, where it can't be out of balance with what the company needs. Otherwise, it's just going to be short-lived.
Right. So clearly, Jeff, you're a wonderful networker. How do you think, networking 10 to 15 years ago, how has that transitioned for you compared to today? I mean, how much different is it for you, especially with the digital world? How big was your network before? How big is it today? How often do you do it? How has that changed for you over the last 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, I would say probably 10, 15 years. I mean, it was, frankly, I think I owe a lot to you in our discussions about making sure that I take the time to do it. It's like anything else, you create the time and the habit to do it, and really think more about my career, not just the company I'm working for, which is a bit of a mind shift that I know in talking to a number of colleagues. That's been a bit of a struggle. So then it becomes a bit more natural. You're building your own brand and connecting, just with, for example, Fellow and other types of services, just actually creating the habit, but having the facility to do it and keep track of it. I think it's easier from a technology standpoint to keep up. The difference is, now that my career has grown, I have so many more people that I want to keep up to date with. It's
Sure.
really, really a challenge. So the part that made it less daunting is not necessarily having to choose who I follow up with. It's more using technology to help me with that. And, part of the problem that I have is I'd like to catch up with people for hours on end. But in reality, you kind of get 20, 30-second slots, and then you have to be okay with that. And having something to keep me up to date with that has been really, I tell you, that's been one of the keys of getting enjoyment out of my career, because that's part of what you not only look back on, but also look forward with. These are the people that you've worked with, and whether they're colleagues now or were previously, it's kind of the fun you bring along with you, at least for me.
So let's talk about technology a little bit, both as a hiring manager and hired folks, and obviously from your own career. Where have you seen the advantages and disadvantages of the job board world, the monsters, the Indeeds, the hot jobs, the career builders through the years? What is your opinion about that when it comes to hiring people, and also when it comes to jobs yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't use them. I just find them to be too big and too generalized for what I'm looking for. And it's not to disparage them. They have, I'm sure, great utility for some. I just haven't found them to be particularly useful for me in my own career search, probably because I'm in a bit of a niche.
Mm-hmm.
I also haven't used them as from a hiring perspective, because I'm also looking for people that fit that niche. So, I haven't found them to be particularly useful. I tell you what's interesting is just the networking. It's the downstream effect, where I'll call it the not so obvious effect. You make a couple of connections in your network, and then suddenly, for me, I do a lot of advising, and 6 months later, somebody will refer to me from a conversation that I had a year ago, right? From an advisory perspective, which ends up being where I end up spending a little bit of time on the phone with them, helping, giving some advice. Oh, they're hiring. Well, I happen to know these people here. So it's that network effect, where I just call it's not so obvious, that tends to benefit me, but also my network. And I'm somewhat of a pay it forward person. So
I'm assuming, from a hiring manager, at least from what I hear from you, and most of your hires are coming from, you're diving into your network, to find people that know people, and going that avenue more than, that typical thing that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years of job boards.
Yeah, and I think LinkedIn has some pretty good products, in terms of recruiting. But even then, that hasn't been as successful as getting back to the conversation where, I really need to get to know somebody before I accept a position and want to work there. I don't know that it's that dissimilar for folks today, when they either know you directly, or there's somebody vouch, hey, I've worked with Jeff Heine, he's really good to work with. You could just see the actual conversation accelerate, and the level of trust accelerate too. So I can't say I exclusively hire from the network, but what I can say is I exclusively hire because of the network.
Okay, I get it. So what is your opinion? I mean, we've gone through this big revolution of LinkedIn. I mean, we remember back in the 15, 16 years ago, we didn't know what it was, and it started to grow, and suddenly it started to take off. And now we all have a gazillion connections. You know, obviously you and I have talked a little bit about, everybody has a gazillion, not really doing anything with them. But I mean, what is your opinion about this explosion of connections in LinkedIn?
Yeah, you know, it's almost become a bit of a, macro marketing tool
Mhm.
where, I still value it, and I still value it from the standpoint of actually having the network, the ability to network, but I trust it less because the connections are a lot less intimate and pure, and the depth of it isn't where it probably used to be. So, it's still very good, and I enjoy it. But in terms of, the practicality in business, when I go to recruit, I tend to go to my network first, like a lot of people, and I have, fellow there and available where I can start to actually market at a more intimate level where, I've already reached out to them. They know what I'm up to. So when I do a reach out, they'll understand it. It kind of short circuits that conversation, if you will. So again, LinkedIn as its place, and I know plenty of companies use it. And I do use it to leverage my network as well, but it's not that level of intimacy that I get with fellow.
I mean, where do you think, I mean, your honest opinion with networking and how, where do you think LinkedIn, in your opinion, is going to be, in the next 5 or 10 years, especially with Microsoft acquiring it and obviously all the changes of focus on an enterprise side of things. And obviously we're 450 million profiles in there. It's just so much. Where do you see things in your mindset of the professional side of, in the career side of things when it comes to LinkedIn?
Well, yeah, I mean, tremendous respect for the business, and I think it was a great acquisition just in terms of the synergies between LinkedIn and Microsoft. I think it's the intimacy that I talked about. It's becoming more of that enterprise tool, which I get it. Everybody is trying to basically build their business. It's
Yep.
become less about the individualized aspect of networking and much more about, the macro recruiting and, almost like a news destination, kind of like that place where you can go and learn. And again, it serves its purpose, and I'm a
Tons of
fan.
value, right?
It,
There's, I said, there's huge value to it, right?
yeah,
It's a big database. I always say, 15 years ago, we were buying leads from brokers. Now I got a ginormous database, of 450 million people. So there is value to it from an enterprise side of things, for sure. But so on your end, because you've seen so much at this point and you've gone through such, a wonderful career so far, what is your biggest advice to, in a marketplace today where, I mean, 20%, we always say 20% of people are actually looking, 50% of people would leave their job today. What direction advice are you giving to your colleagues or to individuals out there on, as we all know, it's not just about finding a job. It's a job that you love, and it's a company you love, a company hopefully you can be in for a period of time. What is that big advice you're giving to your network or to your colleagues?
yeah, it's actually prepare for what's next, and it doesn't have to have a horizon of time. And what's next could be within the same company. But the best piece of advice I have is not just being caught flat-footed and just dedicate yourself to your job completely, and then whether it ends successfully or not, then you're kind of going, oh, what's next? Preparing and working your network to make sure that you're doing ultimately what you love. Because what's interesting too is that, again, it's that not obvious that I mentioned before. When you're actively networking, you don't exactly know what's going to come from it, but I know that there's a lot of opportunities that become as a result of it. Not all you say yes to, and oftentimes that's where you get your next best opportunity. And it's not luck; it's you're creating your luck in that way. So it's much more about making sure that they're having a good sense of self and planning, and making sure they're leveraging their network. And what's interesting is I've talked to a lot of folks in my stage of the career where they've expressed similar concerns and frustrations that I have. And I've been able to relate, not telling them what to do, but maybe how to approach it. And that's been probably my biggest piece of advice. Some have followed it, some have not. But the reality is you do have to make sure that you're building the career that you want. And frankly, I think for companies that would employ you or any business you start, that you get the best out of yourself that way when you're actually doing what you truly care about and love.
It's funny, you don't really think about this so much, but the busiest guys in the world are the ones that spend the most time with their own brand. And it's, people, the biggest excuse, people that don't have time. But look at the big, Mark Cubans or guys like this, right? They own a gazillion companies and they're still branding themselves and marketing themselves, even though they have a million companies. But you're an individual that only works in one corporation. So it's all, and that's where I try to work, and you've done a great job with this in your busy schedule, is you've started to make it a part of your life. That's the key. When you start making it a part of your life, then the good things will happen because everybody's a good product. It's now about, staying connected with that network and being consistent. Question for you now, and, what could you do better now? You've had a chance, you and I have known each other for a few years now, and obviously you've started to implement, a process of communicating with your network more consistently. Where do you see you progressing forward and improving in when it comes to your process, over the next, so what are some of your goals over the next, 12 to 24 months on improving in your process?
Yeah, as much as I've done, I want to do it more and be more consistent with it. Mm-hmm. I've definitely increased my networking time and value from it for sure. And I've seen the downstream results of that, not always in paid engagements or advisory engagement support, but just being very active, which kind of lights me up about helping people in business, and just a lot more opportunities to talk about developing ideas and businesses. It's just being more consistent. Mm-hmm. That's number one for me, because it takes a little bit of time for the network effect to take effect, but it does happen. And so I think consistency is the key driver for that. Plus, there's just a lot of value it adds to your career, but also the place that you're working in at that point.
So, first off, just everybody listening today, I can't recommend more Jeff on his experience. I mean, being a technology recruiter for 20 years and having the experience that you've had, Jeff, and progressing through the startup world and being so successful with it, that's as I tell people, you have this, a lot of people like to use the excuses that something went wrong with their startup and they want to use that. Well, eventually at some point you keep choosing them and they kept failing. Well, you chose to go to that startup. When does it start looking at you and the choices you're making? So when you find somebody like yourself that is progressing and making good choices, that has to tell you the type of person that he or she is and the choices they're going to make in that company, because they're making good choices externally. So first off, I mean, you probably don't understand it, but you're a very small percentage of especially executives that have had such a successful track record. So first off, congratulations on such a great career. So it's so impressive. So one of the things I want to do is, everybody, I'll put Jeff's, personal website up there. If you like to reach out or branch out and introduce yourself to Jeff, and obviously he's very good with advice and networking. So, feel free to reach out to him. If you have any questions for him, because like I said, you're absolutely right. It's a pay it forward approach. I think one of the things you and I talked about to begin with, and I stress with especially all of my relationships, is, when you reach out to your network, always come with an approach of how I can help you. What can I do for you? And if you always have that approach, people are going to start to utilize you and feel comfortable coming to you when they don't need, or when they least expect it, or when you least expect it. And that's an important branding mechanism that I try to sell very heavily, is don't reach out to your network looking for jobs and asking for help for finding jobs. Reach out to your network asking them, how can I help you? Create that brand to your network, and you've done a wonderful job of that. And I think that's a lot of cases why you've been fortunate to build such a strong history of startups, because startups are so hard to pick.
Yeah, well, thank you. And if I could just echo a couple of points too, just to maybe add on some of the prior answers. One, be accessible. That's kind of one of the biggest rules in networking that maybe isn't so obvious. You need to be accessible, right? And need to let people know what you're up to, and you're there, that you're open to be reached for. That's one of the actual lessons it's now obvious to me at the time, but we had a chat back a while back, Kurt, and that was really helpful for me. Plus, people can't figure out what you want. You have to go and assert what you want. And that's the other part of networking, is be very clear. It doesn't always be one point, but maybe a couple of different opportunities, whether it's to help a not-for-profit, be on a board, but have a little bit of intention behind that. And that's also been a really good piece of advice. Knowing what you want allows people to go, oh, okay, I can either help or I can't, or I know somebody that can. And so it's moving with more intention there.
And I think the important piece too, and I appreciate this very much on our relationship, Jeff, is that, I can tell a successful, especially executive, when they're willing to listen, right? Listening is such a strong skill. And, one of the things I try to tell people is, the reason you became a successful executive is you surround yourself with great people. You need to not just think that way in your company. You need to think that in your own personal life. Be willing to invest, into your own brand and get support outside to do that. Use technology to help you. Get some advice from people to help you. Don't come to realize that you're not going to figure this all out on your own. You can't figure this all out. It's hence the reason of why, every company not only has a CEO, but they have all these functional disciplines inside of the company to help build that brand. You now have hundreds of millions of competitors now because of the digital world. The technology you use, the process you create, the advice that you get will be very important for you to stay ahead, in a very competitive marketplace. So I appreciate on your end that you're very willing to listen and get educated because, you're a person that likes to learn to be better at what you do.
Well,
and that's hard for people, right? To listen, I think.
It is, yeah. And maybe hear what you don't want to hear, but it makes you better.
Well, that's why, a lot of the people think they know how to find jobs, and it's just such an evolving process, and it's such a changing. I mean, think about it. 20 years ago, I was faxing resumes. The world has changed and it goes so quickly. It's no way that you can keep up to date with it on your own. You have to have some advisement and some technology today, and some good mentors to help support you through that process, because you can't figure it all on your own. And clearly, not only with the relationships we built, but other relationships that you've made that important. And it's probably one of the reasons why you've done so well with your career so far.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think I'm learning from the best. So just always remain open to learning.
Well, first, so Jeff, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. Love always talking with you and going over some of the things going on in your world. Fantastic advice. I'm sure everybody's going to appreciate some advice. We'll make sure your personal website's there. So thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Kurt. Always great to connect.
Yeah, great. And then everybody else, thanks for being a part of it. And until next week, everybody have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.
If you're actively looking for a full-time role or advisory, board, or consulting opportunity, schedule a call with one of our PCNEs at fellow.us/schedule, and make sure to visit Fellow at www.hellofellow.com.